is crisscrossed by an amazing network of ancient trackways. These remarkable routes are our oldest roads and have been travelled for more than 5,000 years.
It is an extraordinary place.
Walked by pilgrims and traders, hunters and invaders, Celts, Romans, Saxons and Vikings, each track is bound up in myth, mystery and legend. This is it. It's quite a strange-looking monument. But what's the truth behind all these megaliths and burial sites and ley lines and hidden caves along these pathways? And why were their mystic origins such an attraction for later generations? I'm going to explore these tracks to connect the clues they've left hidden in the British landscape. Now, isn't this just about the best cave you've ever seen? Wow!
Her name is Majesty.
What other name could she have? This week, I'm in East Anglia to find the Icknield Way. I want to know what this journey through Norfolk and Cambridgeshire can tell me about the history and legends of ancient Britain, through the stories, songs and sacred places along its track. These are the paths our ancestors would have followed, the ancient trackways that we can still walk today. This is the Icknield Way. It's a great word, Icknield, isn't it? And nobody has a clue what it means. Some people say it might have something to do with the word Iceni, which was the name of Boudicca's tribe, and this was the pathway down which her victorious warriors went. Others say that it could come from an ancient British word for oxen, the oxen's way. But what I love is the fact that you've got this roadway snaking through East Anglia and across to the Chilterns and down towards the Downs and then towards Wessex, and at its heart is a mystery that none of us can decode. The Icknield Way is one of Britain's oldest roads. What remains today is a braid of prehistoric pathways. I'm going to explore this elusive path from the coast in Norfolk, through Cambridgeshire, and finish my journey at Whipsnade in the rolling hills of Bedfordshire. Along the way, I'll explore a prehistoric mine, I'll search for mysterious ley lines in the landscape, uncover the hidden cave of a secret Christian sect, and hear terrifying tales of a demonic dog. All of which will reveal to me how this ancient track was once used. This is the Norfolk coast at Hunstanton. I'm starting my walk near here, a few miles inland, at the beginning of the Icknield Way. For the last few miles, I haven't seen much other than trees and grass and crops. It's like the Icknield Way is hiding its mysteries from me. But this serene landscape is about to offer up its first puzzle, somewhere extraordinary. An ancient underworld that wouldn't look out of place in The Lord of the Rings, Grime's Graves. Grim was the Anglo-Saxon word for the devil. And when the early Saxon settlers arrived here along the ancient Icknield Way in the 5th and 6th century AD, they thought this ghostly place was his cemetery. But these weren't graves. The Anglo-Saxons were wrong. This place had nothing to do with the devil. Far from it. The Icknield Way is just behind me, beyond that ridge. But I've come to this extraordinary moonscape just off the way. It's man-made, although a very long time ago. And to my mind, it's one of the most exciting archaeological sites in Britain. Why do I think that? Because a friend of mine dug it. When did you first come here?
I came here to dig in 1972 and I left here after I'd finished 5 summers in 1976.
So you were practically a teenager when you started?
I was practically a teenager, but not quite, yeah.
What was it that you found here?
Well, I mean, for me, this was a site where I, died and gone to heaven because it was a Neolithic flint mine site. And I think by now you know how passionate I am about flints.
Yeah.
And to actually excavate a flint mine site, well, couldn't get any better, could it?
And we got a mine down here?
This is one of the finest mines on the site.
It's behind. Oh, I know what I will need. This. Right, you going down first or me?
No, you can carry on. You carry on.
You hold that while I go
will do.
My God, it's a long drop.
It's about, well, in old money, it's about 40 feet. So
Yeah.
we're looking at sort of 12 to 13 metres, if my memory serves me correctly.
God, dear, oh dear. Grimes graves were Neolithic mines that were dug to extract the precious stone used to make hunting tools like axe heads and spears. Descending this ladder into one of the 400 pits, I'm going back an incredible 4,500 years. Oh, it's really quite scary. Legs are a bit wobbly. Down, Phil!
Coming down.
How on earth would Stone Age people have been able to dig a shaft this deep?
How would they have done?
Yeah.
Literally through human endeavour. I mean, they had to be motivated to do it.
What did they use?
They used red deer antler picks, Tony. I mean, that's a typical sort of thing. This is a modern one, it's one of mine. But there are literally thousands and thousands of these things scattered through the galleries.
How many blokes do you reckon were working at a time?
Well, they reckon you'd probably be working a team perhaps of 20, and a team of 20 you'd probably need at least 6 months of the year. So it probably was a seasonal occupation.
Wouldn't they get in each other's way?
Well, they might do at the top, but as you've got to get down, then you actually halve the labour force because you need a lot of people to chuck the muck out and get it out at the top.
What was it they were after?
They were after the floor stone. As we go into the galleries,
Yeah.
you'll see that there is this layer of pure black flint that spreads right throughout the bottoms of all of these galleries.
Yeah.
You can see it's a complete seam of black flint. And you can see here actually how they took it out. They got their antler picks and they scored around the edge there, literally gouging out a small trough at the top of the flint, destabilised the chalk, and then they were able to prise out the flint. It's a very clear technique.
Are those real antlers, Phil?
These ones are the real ones, and you can see how similar they are to my replica one. But what you have got on here that you don't get on mine is this clay. You see this clay here that's actually congealed on the antler? That's off the hands of the miners that used them. And oftentimes you can actually see the fingerprints of the last person who used that. It really does put you into contact with those Neolithic miners.
What I don't understand, Phil, is you can find loads of flint on the surface. So what were they doing making these complex series of shafts and galleries?
Well, there's got to be something that drives them to do it.
It's like they're building the underworld, isn't it?
They could well be that is it, but it's not. It's also that the objects that come out from Grimes' graves would in themselves be special and perhaps be revered and respected.
It is an extraordinary place, isn't it?
This was an industrial site, certainly, which no doubt used the Icknield Way as a distribution route. But to me, there seems more to it than that. Something urged these prehistoric miners beyond the need for arrowheads and axes, to dig deeper, to the underworld. There are dozens of ancient stories about darkness and light and people going down into the underworld and coming back and people being reborn. So it does make a kind of sense that Neolithic people would have had some of the same preoccupations and might have enacted them out somewhere below me. But that may just be fanciful, and in fact, these mines were simply industrial. We'll never know, will we? But what we can be sure of is that making them required an awful lot of people and a lot of skill. And surely, 4,500 years ago, every morning, there would have been loads of blokes with deer picks on their back coming in this direction down the Icknield Way for a day's work at the pit. I'm pushing on now, back on the Icknield Way, believed to be one of the oldest roads in Britain. Well, I'm not at the moment. I'm at Thetford railway station. And that's because there was a time when this ancient track was all but lost, inevitably giving way over millennia to Britain's changing landscape. But a century ago, one of England's great war poets set out to rescue this forgotten prehistoric highway. My journey meets his here, where the old track meets the new, on platform 2. In the year 1911, a brilliant young man called Edward Thomas arrived here at Thetford station by train in order to embark on a journey back in time. In his book, he says that when he was on the train, he met this bloke, really fat man, about 18 stone, smoking a pipe, and he said to him, "Can you tell me where the Icknield Way is?" And the bloke said, "Well, I know where the best plane trees and oak trees are around here, and I know who's dead and who's living, and I know the price of the land. But the Icknield Way, never heard of it." And I reckon if you asked most people around here the same question today, you get pretty much the same answer. Thomas was a poet and journalist who had a mystic sense of the road. A compulsive walker, he tramped his way over much of the south of England. Between April and June 1911, Thomas doggedly searched for the missing Icknield Way and its long-lost story. At a stroke, the finished book caught the public imagination and poetically restored the magic of the Icknield. Its iconic opening line reading, "Much has been written of travel, far less of the road." I'm meeting his biographer Matthew Hollis at Thetford Priory. Why did he decide to walk the Icknield Way?
Work. Thomas was a full-time critic. He considered himself a hack. He was, as he said to a friend around about that time, burning his candle at three ends, by which he meant he was working all hours to put money on the table for his family and to keep things going. And this was a job. So up he came, and he started here at Thetford, and on he went.
So in those days he wasn't a poet?
He wasn't a poet at this time. This was 1911 when he came to write this book, and the first poems he will write will be 3 years later. But what's interesting about the Icknield Way book is you can see him thinking about the poetry. You can even find lines in the Icknield Way that will eventually re-emerge in the poems themselves.
Did he like this area?
It was nice about Thetford. He saw it as the gateway to the Icknield Way. Some people like to choose between a landscape of hills and valleys, and others like a landscape of light and water. Now, if you're from this part of the world, in East Anglia, you choose the latter. You're used to the big skies and the colours and the water. Thomas wasn't from here. He lived in Hampshire. He looked west to Wales quite regularly. And here was a little bit flat for him.
I feel a bit guilty about this walk, I have to admit. That there's him approaching it with all this physicality and commitment and striding off into the distance, whereas I can't find half of it, and I go off and stay in a hotel for the night, and I just feel a bit shambolic compared with him. How long did it take him?
Well, there is a secret, because Thomas was capable of walking 10, 15, 20 miles a day. He was an incredibly athletic man. He composed in his head when he was walking. But when he wrote this book, he cheated. And he came here on 2 trips only, one during the summer of 1911 and once during the autumn. And even then, he rode a bike. And he finished the book in the British Museum, the British Library, as it was then.
Why does that make me feel really good?
Tragically, Edward Thomas left behind the chalky ridges of the Icknield Way for the fields of France and the First World War. He was killed aged 39 on Easter Monday 1917, the first day of the Battle of Arras.
For him, a pathway like this one wasn't just a means of getting from A to B. It was almost a meditation. The rhythms that we set up walking along it would help us think and feel and create and get into ourselves. And he loved the way that we would interact with nature along our path and the way that we invested it with life. We say the path goes up the hill, the path goes back down again. No, it doesn't. It stays still. It's us who do the walking. But nevertheless, we feel as though it's alive. And I suppose that most people who walk a lot feel something similar. But Thomas's brilliance was that he wrote about it in such a fluent way.
I think he got the measure of the Icknield Way quite early on. I could not find a beginning or an ending to the Icknield Way, he wrote. It is thus a symbol of mortal things, with their beginnings and ends in immortal darkness. I've now left the heathland of Norfolk and crossed into Cambridgeshire, and am suddenly confronted by something that cuts dramatically across the Icknield Way, a place also described by Edward Thomas, the Devil's Dyke. The massive bank and ditch stretch in a near straight line for over 7 miles, and in a flat landscape reaches an imposing 30 feet in height.
There's a local story that the devil gate-crashed a wedding at a little town called Reach, a few miles in that direction. And he was kicked out by the guests, and he was so angry that on his way back to hell, he carved this enormous gash out of the landscape with his tail. Must have been a pretty big devil, wasn't it?
Yet again, the old devil gets the blame. In reality, of course, the Devil's Dyke was man-made, built by the Saxons in the late 6th or early 7th century AD. This was a time of war between the ancient kingdom of Mercia to the west and the kingdom of East Anglia to the east. And this huge rampart formed a crucial border for controlling trade and the movement of people between the two. Today, it's a protected wildlife habitat, where one resilient local tradition remains as a link to the past.
Hi, Martin.
Hello there.
Shall we have a look at these sheep?
Yep, see if they'll come through.
The most important function of this dike was the control of trade. The dike itself runs at right angles to the Icknield Way and local Roman roads, which were central for traffic going in and out of East Anglia. And one of the most significant commodities in Anglo-Saxon times to be traded was wool. In Anglo-Saxon society, the great landowners counted their wealth in sheep. And tracks like the Icknield Way provided the route to market. By the wool boom of the Middle Ages, there was an enormous demand for wool clothing in Europe. If you owned land, you raised sheep. With top prices paid by the weavers of Flanders in Belgium, English wool was the crude oil of its day. Some parts of the Icknield Way are lost to the encroachment of agriculture and urban sprawl, a landscape unrecognisable to bygone travellers. A nearby parallel path brings me through Hayley Wood, one of the last surviving ancient woodlands in Britain. It gives me a chance to experience the habitat that would have covered most of southern England at a time when the Icknield Way was a thriving highway. And it was along tracks like this that trade would have travelled, that news would have travelled, and indeed that music and song would have travelled too.
Was walking out for to take the air. She met a sailor all on her way. So I paid attention. So I paid attention to hear what she did say. Tony, hello.
This is not some mad, solitary lunatic in the middle of the forest. We did actually know we were meeting up here, didn't we? What was that song?
That's the Dark-Eyed Sailor. It's an old English folk song, common in these parts and others too. That's a local version from the Icknield Way, so, but it's a song that would be found all over England and Britain.
These songs genuinely travelled?
All over the place, to America, to Ireland, Scotland, backwards and forwards. Wherever people went, they would take their songs with them and sing them as they went.
The Icknield Way is pretty special, isn't it?
Very much so, yeah. And to think that that passage of people carrying the old knowledge, you know, over generations and generations is a magic idea.
It's hard to resist this romantic idea of wandering minstrels in medieval England. For travellers along the Icknield Way, ballads and stories might have fired the imagination, but they wouldn't have filled their bellies. They only needed to look around them for that.
Well, we've got a veritable larder here of stuff. I mean, beautifully growing here, very common plant. If you're looking for something pig-like, have a sniff of that.
That does smell like a pigsty.
Yeah.
This is my bacon sandwich, isn't it?
Indeed.
What is it?
It's the hogweed, and a very common roadside plant. The younger shoots steam up beautifully to be a kind of asparagus alternative.
Oh, so you don't eat the stinky part?
No, that won't be very good for you. But got copious amounts of goosegrass, or sticky willy, as it's called.
Oh, charming. Oh, yeah, it's just disgustingly sticky, isn't it?
Yeah, have a chew on that.
Really?
Yeah, great for the immune system. And it's bitter, but it's actually immensely nutritious.
Actually, it is quite. It's like a bitter, crunchy vegetable, isn't it? It's
Like a chard.
not
or
grassy
something.
at all.
No.
This is the Icknield Way service station, isn't it?
Exactly, your chemist.
Yeah.
But I did want to show you one other curious specimen, the woody nightshade. And these berries here, as delicious as they look, are deadly poisonous. And there is also a brilliant folk song connects to this plant here.
Will you sing me off to it while I go on my way then?
Would love to. It's Lord Randall. Oh, mother dear, let my bed be made, for I feel the gripe of the woody nightshade. Lie low, sweet Randall. Come all you young men that do eat full well, and those that sup right and merry. It's far better, I entreat, to have toads for your meat than to eat all the wild berries.
Here in the town of Royston in Hertfordshire, the Icknield Way crosses the Roman road of Ermine Street, also known as the Great North Road, where the Roman legions marched north from London. Royston grew at the crossing of these two ancient thoroughfares. On the surface, this may look like any other charming town centre, but under this pavement beneath me is something strange. In 1742, workmen accidentally discovered a man-made cave with some unique, mysterious Christian carvings.
This place is so brilliant. It's only about 50 miles from London. I'd never even heard of it. Look, you've got all these carvings. See that tunnel? That's the way people would have originally come in on a rope. And then if you look above that, right up to the ceiling, you see where the daylight's coming in. That's the grill I was looking through when I was outside that betting shop. The carvings themselves, though, this one, that's pretty clear, isn't it? That's St. Christopher with a little baby Jesus on his shoulder, and he's walking along with his staff there. And then they reckon this is the Holy Sepulchre where Jesus was buried. And I love this bit above it. This here is the hand of God with those incredible fingers there. And that thing that looks like a fish is actually the Holy Ghost, which is just going to go hurtling out into the world. And that's a crucifixion. Here's St. Catherine, famous for the wheel, of course. There's the wheel on which she was tortured. More figures down here, very strange, mystical figures. And over here, this is probably my favourite, this one here. This is 13 of these figures. They reckon these were the disciples and Jesus at the Last Supper. And you see this little sliver here? Well, Judas was such a bad lad that he has to be there because it's recorded that he was at the Last Supper, but he's far too iniquitous to have his whole face shown. Now, isn't this just about the best cave you've ever seen?
These strange religious carvings aren't displayed proudly like you might expect in some churches. Great lengths were gone to keep this shrine hidden, and the origin and function of the cave remain a mystery to this day. We know it was used in the Middle Ages, but by who? Was it a hermit's retreat or a spiritual den for the Knights Templar? It turns out, though, that this wasn't just a secret site for Christian worship. The cave holds an allure for pagans, too. Royston is believed to be the meeting place between two important ley lines. These ley lines are said to be straight energy lines connecting ancient mystical sites, and it's believed this cave marks the exact spot where the two lines cross. There are even some people who say they can detect these lines of energy. I'm meeting Derek Woodhead, a practitioner of the ancient art of dowsing.
Derek, come in and let's have a stare around this fantastic place, which is fairly wonderful. Now, I know that it's really fascinating because of all the carvings, but for you, there's something about it that's additionally fascinating, isn't it?
Yes, this is an amazing place for dowsers because it's the crossing of the Michael and Mary lines.
This is also where the Roman road crosses the Icknield Way, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
But they're not the same thing.
Not necessarily, no. There is some sort of correlation between ancient trackways and ley lines.
Can you show me how you'd identify these lines?
Right. Well, using dowsing rods, we can use pendulums as well. I use a dowsing rod here, which is a metal one on a spindle. Originally, they were forked twigs they used to use, but these days you can use metal or plastic rods or timber ones. So what this does here is I'm asking sort of through my subconscious to, in a sort of semi-meditative state.
So are you in a semi-meditative state now?
Yeah, so yes. It's not my conscious mind that's doing that. Something's going through my nervous system and in my subconscious. So I'm looking for the centre of it. So it's like a beam of imaginary white light. I'm sort of visualising them. So I'm going to ask it where the centre of the Mary line is that's running through this cave, and it's immediately pointing over this way. And I'm asking for the rod to deflect when I go through the centre of the St Mary line. And I'm finding it there. It's quite a strong reaction there. And if I do it from another direction, it's there. So it's showing that
is that where the 2 meet up?
The Mary line is flowing through this way. Then I ask for the Michael line, and show me where where the Michael line is. I know it's over that way. So this closest point is over there somewhere. So I'm looking for the centre of the Michael line. It's here. So we've got two very powerful energy flows meeting about here. So this would be a great place to sort of do meditation or prayer or connection with the divine or whatever. This is a very powerful spot.
The idea of ley lines dates back to 1921, when amateur antiquarian Alfred Watkins saw how ancient landmarks in the countryside could be connected along a straight line. Watkins called them ley lines, or leys, and believed they revealed the prehistoric tracks of Britain. Above ground and back on the Icknield Way, I'm up on the heath overlooking Royston. It's easy to see why he thought they were the outdoor footprints of a long-past people.
Watkins' approach was pretty do-it-yourself. You can imagine him on a Sunday surrounded by his acolytes looking for ley lines, and they'd come to somewhere like the Icknield Way and they'd see something of significance on that horizon, and they'd see something else, a barrow or something over there, and they'd get out their RAC map and their rulers and their dividers and compasses and draw a straight line between them. Wow, we've got another ley line. It's a real pre-Second World War picture, isn't it?
Watkins attracted acclaim and controversy in equal measure. He used strange reenactments to explain his theory about some of these sites, one of which was filmed. At Woodcraft Folk Camp near the River Wye in 1933, Watkins ordered a wicker cage built on top of the Queen's stone to illustrate his theory that the stone was a sacrificial altar. The cage contained 2 victims wearing loincloths. As a result of the success of his book, people set out all over the country to discover their own paths. I'm meeting the grandson of one of Watkins' disciples, who just happens to be a druid.
Hello.
Hello there.
So your granddad was pretty involved with Watkins, wasn't he?
Yes, he started the Straight Track Club with Watkins and ran it for 9 years while Watkins was still alive.
What was the Straight Track Club?
Well, it was a club for people who were fascinated by this idea of the old straight tracks, the alignments, And they would go out on field trips together, and they would plot lays on maps and then go out and actually walk them.
I love the idea of them all dressed up in their respectable clothes, going round the walkways.
Yes, here you see pictures of their outings with Sir Charles de Bell and Watkins himself walking towards the camera.
What was his theory?
Well, his idea was that mounds, church spires, single standing trees on hilltops, niches in ridges and so on, were all aligned in a certain way. It was used, the idea was that in prehistory, our ancestors used these particular markers as markways to help them navigate. It was a sort of ancient GPS system, really.
They were particularly interested in the Icknield Way, weren't they?
They were. In fact, in this book, towards the end, there's a cutting that my granddad put in from 1938 on the letters page of the Times, talking about the Icknield Way and about how it's not originally a Roman road, but was much older, was an old track.
Why do you think Watkins' ideas were so attractive?
I think his theories were so popular because his book was published in the 20s, after the First World War. We'd suffered the ravages of that war, so we yearned for the countryside.
Whether it's creepy Christian caves or lines of invisible energy, the Icknield Way seems completely entangled in myth and legend. Stories created by generation after generation to explain the forgotten history along its path. I'm now moving south along the highest part of the Icknield in Bedfordshire to where the landscape gives way to the suburbs of Greater London. I'm on the lookout for a haunted hill steeped in dark tales of the supernatural.
Over there is Galley Hill, and it's surrounded by stories of hangings and executions and witches. Most of those stories have been virtually forgotten, but there's one that still remains.
This is the story of the big black dog of Galley Hill. A gallows was erected here and remained until the 18th century, and visions of a hellhound have been reported ever since. Stories of the black dog can be found throughout British folklore, often at places of execution and on ancient pathways, like this one.
Once upon a time, hundreds of years ago, a storm arose over this hill. The fiercest storm in living memory, and all the people of the pretty little market town of Luton went indoors. Thunder and lightning crashed down, and a fork of lightning came out of the clouds, and it hit the gallows on Galley Hill, which erupted into flames, and out of the inferno came an enormous black dog. It sniffed around for a bit and then burrowed into the ashes and disappeared. And ever after that, if ever a traveller came by who had evil in his heart, the dog would appear again, tear open his chest, rip out his soul, and take his soul with him down to the bowels of hell. At least that's what I've been told, Carl. Thank you for coming to such a scary place to meet me today. Was there really a gallows on Galley Hill?
Well, I think there's every reason to think that there was. The name is powerfully suggestive, and it's also just the right kind of place to put a gallows up.
In what way?
Well, it's on high ground, it's near a significant centre of population, and it's also amidst a number of different important routeways. So this is a very good place to make a spectacle of punishment and to deter malefactors.
And it's actually on the Icknield Way, isn't it? So one could imagine that the images of all these people dangling and the stories to go with them would have travelled up and down the path.
Yes, absolutely.
So like in a present-day horror movie, you've actually put all the evil dead in one place overlooking your town.
Yes, and I think that might be quite an interesting fact about the site, because some of those late burials, the people who we think might well have been the victims of the gallows, were interred at this site, not in a conventional way, but rather head first, inclined into the earth. So you insert them in that way, burying them head first, perhaps.
So they'll go downwards.
So that if they dig themselves out, they really dig themselves in.
Yeah.
And that is redolent of the kinds of beliefs that one sometimes finds associated with these sites, that they are populated by ghosts, by revenants, by the returning dead.
I suppose that's where my story of the black dog fits in, doesn't it? This idea that he's dragging them all down into the bowels of hell.
Very often the folkloric black dogs, that they can be benign, they can function as omens or portents, but in very many cases the black dogs have more than a whiff of the demonic or the infernal about them, and that seems to be the character of the dog that was putatively seen on Galley Hill. It's being portrayed as a hunter of souls, a bearer of souls off to the other world, and that sort of fits with a story about Galley Hill as a place populated by lost souls.
Lost souls have been a recurring theme for me walking along the Icknield Way, following in the footsteps of all those long gone that have trod this track before me. The ghosts of the past return as you encounter their clues along the path. The Icknield Way itself becomes a sort of ghost line. I'm almost at the end of my journey now, following the Icknield Way as it snakes along the eastward spurs of the Chiltern Hills.
It's funny, I always think of our ancient pathways as buried in the depths of the countryside in Wiltshire or the Lake District or the Highlands or somewhere. But here, there's Hitchin, Bedford, Dunstable, places that I think of as extensions of the outer suburbs of London. And yet it's so beautiful. Sorry, Hitchin.
The Icknield Way brings me finally to Whipsnade Tree Cathedral, the end of my journey. So much of the track has been forgotten, but this part of it is about remembering, a natural memorial to the lost generation of the First World War. A symbol of how Britain, after the horrors of the Western Front, attempted to return to nature and the old ways. Created as a sanctuary for reflection, Whipsnade is a place where every year people return to remember the fallen under a leafy canopy. A place I think Edward Thomas, had he lived, would have loved.
It's not hard to see how this beautiful avenue of trees was inspired by the great naves of the English cathedrals, is it? They were actually put up by a local landowner, a guy called Edmund Blythe, after the First World War, in memory of the lads who'd died in France. And you can imagine the survivors coming home, bruised, battered, their worlds turned upside down, maybe they'd lost their faith in God. And these trees and bushes giving them some solace and a bit of calm to their shattered souls. Edward Thomas, of course, captures that spirit marvellously in a poem he wrote called Roads, which starts off just as a celebration of the concept of roads. I love roads. The goddesses that dwell far along invisible are my favourite gods. Roads go on while we forget and are forgotten like a star that shoots and is gone. But then, towards the end of the poem, he really twists the knife. Now all roads lead to France, and heavy is the tread of the living, but the dead returning lightly dance.
Edward Thomas's message was for each of us to find our own road, and this has been mine, my Icknield Way. I've picked up the path near the Wash at Hunstanton, and have been guided along its route by prehistoric miners, war poets, ley lines and black dogs. In some ways, it's been both an emotional and an inspiring journey, but in the end, it's been a journey to feed the imagination.
The Icknield Way isn't one of those heritage paths where you get a little green arrow at every junction to tell you whether to turn left or right. It's a confusing footpath. It turns back on itself. It splits into two sometimes, or even three, or you lose it completely and find it again another mile further on. But the reality is that a track like this isn't so much about the destination, it's about the journey. And I've had a fabulous time, even if, like the great poet Edward Thomas, I occasionally had to cheat a bit.
While bringing home their 147 medals, the Rio 2016 Superhumans Parade will be live Monday afternoon at 4 from Manchester. Tomorrow night at 8, Standing Up to Cancer. Krishna from the newsroom, Rachel from Countdown and Aisling B from the Cats take on the smartest of cookies, Child Genius versus Celebrities. And some other cats who like to count on the way next.